Every home, so the saying goes, has a past. But what if that history begins to fall apart in horrifying ways after you move into your ideal house? Imagine discovering you're not alone while unloading boxes in a peaceful home. We're delving into real-life moving-in horror tales from haunted houses today that will make you reconsider turning out the lights. These are testimonies from individuals who experienced terrifying situations they never anticipated, not only ghost tales. Our first narrative takes place in a small Kansas town where the Thompsons, a family of 4, moved into a farmhouse from the Victorian period that had been for sale for years. The house was ideal for a family since it was large, had a wraparound porch, elaborate woodwork, and high ceilings. However, shortly after they moved there, they started to have experiences that defied rational explanation. Initially, it was the little details. The sound of footsteps filling empty spaces, doors creaking slowly and independently. Initially, Mrs. Thompson dismissed it as the old home settling. Then everything got out of hand. She was putting her kid to bed one night when they both heard a distinct sound, their names being spoken from the closet. Mrs. Thompson opened the closet door, thinking her husband may be pulling a practical joke, but there was nothing inside. Now frightened, her daughter vowed that she saw a shadow in the corner of her room every night. Mrs. Thompson quickly came to the realization that it wasn't simply her daughter. A feeling of fear overcame her when she started to see flickering shadows in the corners. Months later, the Thompsons had had enough. They fled the home because they could no longer stand the whispers and shadows. They discovered years later that the home had been constructed on top of the ruins of an ancient church and cemetery that had been destroyed in a fire. In our following tale, Sarah and James, newlyweds, move into a colonial home from the 19th century in Connecticut. The couple fell in love with its historic charm despite the fact that property was a fixer-upper. As they started the renovations, the first few weeks were full with joy and fun. However, they quickly began to discover oddities. One night, a chill shot through Sarah's arm, waking her up as if an icy hand had touched her skin. Bewildered and drowsy, she slid over, expecting to see James reach out, but he was comfortably asleep beside her, his back to her. The stillness seemed to shut in on her as she tried to shake off the unnerving sensation. "Just my imagination," she said to herself as she drew the duvet up over her chin. But the cold touch was back. Night after night, Sarah would experience the same cold touch on her arm, which sometimes lingered as if the object or person didn't want to let go. The darkness began to dominate her, and each night became a silent battle as she lay awake, bracing herself for the touch she knew was coming. She started to dread sleep since she couldn't explain the uncanny presence that seemed to visit her alone. She worried that maybe she wasn't dreaming as she became more and more tired. Sarah's once safe bed turned into a place of dread, and the shadows in the room became more menacing each night, making her feel more alone and afraid in her silent battle. Until he seen it for himself, James first didn't trust her. He saw a stranger standing at the doorway late one evening, observing them. He glanced over and saw that it was Sarah, but she was sound sleeping. He was gripped with horror as the apparition disappeared. When they discovered marks on the walls with phrases like, "Get out," engraved deeply into the wood, the situation deteriorated. The couple quickly made the decision to leave the home and give up on their plan to restore it. Because they believe that something evil still exists behind those walls, they still won't discuss what happened to them. A young guy called Chris moved into a little home in a tiny Virginian town. It was calm and comfortable, ideal for a new beginning. But as soon as he started unloading, something seemed a little off. He discovered that boxes would vanish from one area and then return in another as he was unpacking his possessions. It continued occurring, even though he believed he was just forgetful. He would put everything in its proper position before going to bed each night, only to awaken to find a jumble of boxes arranged in odd shapes. He installed a camera one evening to try to look into the strange events, thinking that an intruder or prankster was to blame for the disturbances. He set up the camera to film the living room, as it seemed to be where the most unsettling behavior was occurring. Strangely reassured, He allowed it to record through the night, certain that the camera would finally give him an answer. The next morning, he eagerly viewed the footage, expecting for any rational explanation, like a raccoon. But while he watched, his heart was racing. Boxes were seen moving across the floor in the video, perhaps being pushed by invisible hands. They proceeded slowly and methodically, stopping and starting as if an unseen entity were carefully arranging them. His pulse quickened as he stared with fascination. Chris, terrified, attempted to use sage to purify the place, but it just appeared to aggravate whatever was within. Leave, or suffer. He heard whispering that night, and he heard heavy footsteps pounding up and down the corridor. Chris quickly came to the conclusion that he had had enough. He went to a different town after leaving the cottage and his possessions behind. He has never turned around. Lucy, the subject of our following tale, relocated to Oregon in search of a new beginning. She discovered a lovely 2-story house with an attic, which was ideal for more storage space. In the attic, Lucy sensed something off, but she brushed it off as nervousness from an unfamiliar environment. One evening when she was emptying boxes in the dusty attic, she heard a gentle melodic tune drifting through the air. At first she assumed it was her phone, maybe a notification sound echoing off the walls. But when she reached into her pocket and found silence, a chill went up her spine. It wasn't an artificial sound, it was a lullaby. With her hands still buried in a half-unpacked box, she paused and listened intently. The haunting melody seemed to be coming from deep inside the walls as it floated through the darkness. Every note reverberated with an eerie subtlety that evoked her memories in a manner that was both familiar and disagreeable. The music became louder, its creepy presence filling the little attic like an invitation she didn't want to accept. Her pulse pounding, she looked about, exploring the shadowy corners of the attic that were beyond the reach of her little lamp. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, and her breath was short. She was unable to look away from the ghostly melody. When the room became quiet, she hardly had the power to move. Just the knowledge that she was not alone remained. Lucy fled downstairs in terror, trying to convince herself it was all in her head. However, she could hear the same unsettling song each time she went back to the attic. Soon after, Lucy started seeing antique toys for kids all around the home, including a rattle, a little teddy bear, and an ancient doll. She knew she hadn't brought these toys with her, and she was the only one residing there.